Hello, my name's Tim Shoebridge, and thanks for watching my latest video. This one is going to be a bit of a vlog style because I want to share with you my thought processes over the last few weeks in regard to synthesizers, synthesizer technology, and what I invest in going forward. I think that those decisions are going to end up certainly influencing the videos that I post in the future. So this is why I'm showing them now. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you will know that I am a massive fan of the synthesizer behind me, which a German-speaking person told me how to pronounce the name only recently. Behringer, not Behringer, as I've been calling it all my life. This Behringer Model D, I absolutely love it. It's a fantastic synthesizer, and there's two reasons really why I love it. First of all, the immediacy and the familiarity of the controls that are on the front of it, but secondly, most importantly, because of its sound. It's got this wonderful, warm, rich, slightly fuzzy sound to it, and that really fits well with the kinds of sounds that I like to make and the kind of music that I like to make. So I've done quite a few videos on it, a few different aspects of it. And I've been really seriously thinking about buying more than one of them and polychaining them together to have a polyphonic capability, well, basically a polyphonic capability. I even got to the point a couple of weeks ago where I sold off a few other of my bits and pieces of equipment in order to fund the purchase of 3 more Model Ds. I even put in an order for those 3 Model Ds. And unfortunately I was told that there's such a long waiting list that it won't be until June that I'd get them. And I guess that's fair enough, but at the end of the day, having that delay has been a good thing, because it's meant that I've really sort of like thought very, very carefully about what I'm actually doing here. Although I love the sound of the Model D and the idea of having 3 or 4 of them actually chained together so I can play 4-note chords with them would be an amazing thing. Actually, how practical would it really be? Just thinking about it, having 4 Model Ds means you've got 12 oscillators that you need to tune. Something that I've noticed quite recently with my Model D is that it's starting to need recalibration. I'll give you an example. If I take 2 of the oscillators at the same octave range and I tune them perfectly together, and then I just turn the octave range on both of them up, they're out of tune again. I retune them, I turn the octave range back down, they're out of tune again. So even within octave ranges, they're starting to go out of tune. And I'll put it up with it for a while until the point where I really do need to recalibrate it. The user manual that comes with the synth goes into a lot of detail about that recalibration procedure. So they're clearly expecting you to need to do it. I read it through and I was quite horrified at how complicated it was. I'm not relishing the thought of having to do it. I'm certainly not relishing the thought of having to do it times 4. And until I do it, it means that my opportunities for having to keep retuning oscillators is quite high as I'm fiddling around and changing oscillator ranges, etc. And to do that times 12 oscillators is kind of totally impractical. I'll spend most of my time fiddling around and tuning rather than actually making music, which is the most important thing. And even then, without the tuning aspect of it, there's some total impracticalities to polychaining these together. There's no way that you could do a real-time filter sweep, for example. You could hold down the note with your sustain pedal and then turn 2 of them, but you can't turn more than 2 of them at a time. There's just certain things that I just wouldn't be able to do really well, if at all, polychaining these synths together. And the whole setup of a patch, getting it right on one, then having to replicate it on the next and the next and the next. It's kind of totally impractical. It was a bit of a romantic idea I had that I would actually have these 4 things, build a sort of like a case for them. It's a bit of a romantic idea. It's totally impractical. And because I've got time to think about this and think about other alternatives, I've been looking very seriously at other alternatives, as in a single polysynth that could potentially replicate what I'm trying to achieve with these four Model Ds. Now you might have noticed or spotted in some of my videos, I do have a Behringer DeepMind 12 desktop version. It's a beautiful and wonderful synthesizer. It's very, very quirky in terms of the oscillators and the waveforms that you can use. It can create some fantastic, really, really fantastic warm sounds, and I really like it. But it is not in any way able to sort of replicate what four or more Model Ds would be able to create in terms of their sounds. So I've been looking at the market to see what polysynths are out there that I could potentially afford. Let's face it, four Model Ds at 300 UK pounds each is £1,200, and for £1,200 you can buy. There's quite a few polysynths out there to choose from. Now I want to talk about one particular polysynth because it's the one I ended up buying. I'll come on to that in a minute. That polysynth is by Novation, and it's called the Peak. And when it was announced, and when it came out, and when there were reviews of it, and when people started to sort of like show some sort of like demos of it on YouTube, I kind of went, nah, no, I don't know, thanks very much. And the reason why I did that was because I'd had a bad experience in the past with a digitally controlled synthesizer, and actually the synthesizer that I'm going to now mention actually has got analog oscillators, I believe. So before I had the Model D, I had a Korg Minilog. Now there's many people that absolutely love that synthesizer to death, and that's absolutely fine. We're all different, we're all got our different requirements, and we all like different sounds, and that's just the way it works. But for me, I couldn't easily get out of the Minilog the sort of soft, warm, fuzzy tones that I was really looking for out of it. It was very easy for me to make sort of hard, brittle, crisp sounds, but making softer sounds was difficult for me. I managed it a few occasions. Obviously it's got presets so you can save it and come back to them, but I just found, just generally speaking, the sound wasn't to my taste. I didn't really get on with the filter. I found that to make those mellow sounds you need to like turn the frequency cutoff all the way down, and then what I found with the Minilog filter was it literally was like a volume control. When you turned it down, the sound just disappeared. You didn't have that warmth there. So it was probably something I was doing. It was probably just me not just gelling with the synth. In all other respects, the synth is a beautiful, fantastic, gorgeous looking little synthesizer. It's got some fantastic functionality in it, and it's really, really a good price. But for me, the sound really didn't gel with me, so I ended up selling it. And I think that experience really sort of like was why when the Novation Peak came out, that I didn't in any way, shape or form think of it and go, that sounds okay, maybe it'll be okay. Sort of like having a bad experience, if you like. I just thought, well, with all of the demos that I've heard of the Peak, it just sounds a bit harsh. It does sound a bit digital. Maybe I was hearing it wrongly or whatever, but I was put off by it. I had the opportunity to try one out in the last few weeks, and what the first thing I did with it was, the very first thing I did with it was flick through the first literally 100 presets and listen to them, and I was just like, no, I don't like this at all. There are a few good presets there, most of them actually in Bank B, but in Bank A I just didn't like them. It's trying to showcase the synth in the wrong way, in my opinion. I just was not turned on by those presets. But I spent about 6 hours in total sitting down with it, side by side with the Model D. I went through the basic waveforms. It's a 3 oscillator synth with 3 fully functional oscillators, and so from that point of view, I could see that there's like a really good sort of like parallels with the Model D if I could sort of like recreate the warm sounds that I want. So I spent the 6 hours with it. I went through the basic waveforms. I saw if I could recreate the 3 very closely tuned but not quite perfectly tuned sound that you get from a Model D with those 3 oscillators. The Novation Peaks oscillators are fully 100% digital, and they create pure sounds. So for me, the challenge was to try and get impurity in them in a way that actually replicated, mimicked what I was getting on my Model D. And that's what I basically spent many hours doing. I found that there were some challenges along the way, but I actually, in the end, I'm very, very happy with the sounds that I got from the Peak. I've got it here, so I ended up buying it. So here it is. It's just a fantastic synth in many ways because it's got all of the knobs on the front. It's totally accessible. It's totally logical. Anyone that's looked at any other synthesizer will go, okay, oscillator section, amplifier section, filter section, effects, envelopes, LFOs. It's really well laid out. The build quality is absolutely fantastic. There is a little bit of menu diving going on up here, but it's a very simple display, very simple to get at the options here. It's very, very intuitive. And I really like it from that point of view, but what I've been able to do is, to my ear at least, recreate the analog sounds that I love so much out of the Model D using this. So what I'm going to do with the remainder of this video is just show you some of those side-by-side comparisons of basic waveforms between the Model D and this, talk over it a little bit, tell you how I got to those sort of like get a good match on the sounds, where I didn't and what I did. I'm not trying to just replicate the Model D. I'm trying to just see if I can get the warmth and the character out of this synthesizer. And I really believe that it is possible to do so. If you think about it in terms of the price, it's about £1,200 here in the UK for this thing. So it's the same price as 4 Model Ds. Now for me, if I can get the warmth and the character from the sound out of it, then it's not a 4-voice polyphonic synth, it's an 8-voice polyphonic synth. And there's going to be some option in the future to make it 16, I believe. But it's 8-voice polyphonic. It's got amazing modulation capabilities built into it. It's got 2 LFOs. It's got some fantastic effects. The reverb just sounds absolutely gorgeous. It's got such a lot going for it, as well as having that sort of like warm character to the sound if you want it. So although it's £1,200, and I know not many people have £1,200 to spend, if you are looking to invest in a synthesizer, then this really could be your sort of like your one-stop shop for fantastic mono sounds and poly sounds all together in one unit. If I was to sort of like step back and go back in time, before I bought the Model D and my Deep Mind and a few other bits and pieces, I really should have seriously considered the Novation Peak, because it's not a twangy, hard, brittle digital synthesizer. It's got a lot of character to it. So this is not an advert for the Novation Peak, by the way. I'm not getting paid anything to say anything about it. I went out and bought one for myself, and here it is. I'm just sort of like elated that I did buy it because it really does sound fantastic. I'll try and show you now some of those side-by-side comparisons between it and the Model D. I doubt very much that you're going to hear, with the YouTube compression that there is, I doubt very much that you're going to hear the sort of like the subtleties to the sound that I certainly can hear on my speakers here. And at the end of the day, it's not just about trying to recreate 4 or 8 Model Ds. It's about having a synthesizer that can come close enough to that kind of sound, that when you create music, you put patches together and you put sequences together in a mix, that they sound acceptable to you, and that's what it's all about. So come up with the side-by-side comparisons next, and I hope you enjoy it. And in the future, I'll be featuring this synthesizer Similar way that I did with the Model D, putting together some tracks, putting together some patches, and let's just see where it leads me. So thanks very much for watching. Okay, so for the first comparison, I've got the Model D with all three oscillators tuned as closely as I can. There's a tiny little bit of drift between them, and we're on the sawtooth, and no filter at all, just a little bit of a release on the contour. Got the same setup on the Novation, everything perfectly in tune. And let's just listen to the difference between them. So this is the Model D. Lovely sound. And this is the Peak. Not quite such a lovely sound, and that's because all three oscillators, they're digital oscillators, therefore they're going to be perfectly synchronized unless I do something to the front panel. So I can detune them, so there's a fine tune control on all three of the oscillators, which is fair enough. I'm not going to go into all of the details of all the experimentation that I've been doing for hours, but what I'll just tell you is that what I found to match my Model D was if I detuned one of them very, very slightly, and then if I go into this oscillator menu, there's a common page, and there's something called diverge and something called drift. And with a lot of experimentation, if I set the diverge to about 20 and I set the drift to about 10, then what I was finding is that was giving me a similar sound. So this is the Model D, and now this is the Peak. Maybe just give it a little bit more volume. Model D. Peak. So I'll just play a little sequence so you can just, and then I'll flip between them so you can hear the difference. So this is the Model D first. And now the Peak. Model D. Peak. Model D. Peak. So they don't match exactly. That's not the whole intention, is to match them exactly, because I could match them exactly now, and in an hour or two's time they won't match exactly to the Model D anymore. The Model D is constantly changing, and it's constantly drifting and diverging between the oscillator, so it's not going to ever perfectly match, and from one Model D to the next it's not going to perfectly match. But the idea is that I can introduce a little bit of uncertainty and a little bit of variation into the sound to sort of like simulate true analog oscillators as opposed to the digital ones that we've got here in the Peak. So that's the first little bit of experimentation. While I've got the sawtooth up here, let's have a quick look at the filter. They're different filters, they're different analog technologies. It's a true analog filter inside the Peak. They're not going to sound exactly the same, but with some tweaking and fiddling around I can get them to sound very, very similar. So if I were to just, for example, take the cutoff frequency and turn it down halfway, and then do exactly the same thing on my Model D, they're clearly not going to sound the same. I'm going to need to find a place where they do. So this is what the Model D sounds like, and this is the peak. And actually what I can tell immediately is the peak has got key tracking on, yeah, whereas the Model D didn't. So Model D, peak. As you can see, turning it around to 12 o'clock, the effect of the filter cutoff is a lot stronger on the peak than it is on the Model D. So I can just bring it back a little bit. Go back to Model D. Peak. It's quite similar. Model D. Peak. Let's play this that little sequence again. Let's start off with the Model D. And then the peak. Model D. They sound very, very, very similar. Okay, so we could introduce a little bit of resonance. Well, let's try 50% halfway around and do the same on the Model D. Let's just try that for jazz. This is the Model D to start with, and this is the peak. So if you got, it's a little louder. Have I got the overdrive on? No. Model D. Yeah, you can see the volume increases. So I would take the volume back a little bit. Model D. Peak. It sounds a little bit more resonant with the peak after a bit. Let's take it back a bit. Almost there. Let's just play the sequence then. Model D first. Then the peak. Model D. Similar but not the same, and actually I can hear that the Model D, there's quite a lot of drift between the oscillators at the moment, so I shall probably take a little pause and just retune them again, because they are sounding quite out of phase with one another. But as you can see, it's a simple little test, but you can get very, very similar sounds. But like I said at the beginning, it's not about trying to exactly replicate a Model D sound. It's trying to just make sure that the peak can come up with those sort of warm sounds that the Model D is so good at. Okay, so now I've got the Model D set up. Triangle wave, I did just retune it. It was a little bit out. Certainly it changed in the last half an hour. So it's back in tune as much as I can. This is what the Model D sounds like. 3 oscillators all playing a triangle. Okay, and this is the peak. Very, very, very similar. I've got the peak, the diverge is about 22. I said it to 20 before, but about 22. What I found with that diverge parameter is that ideally it would track the keyboard. So for higher register sounds, it doesn't need to be so high, but for lower register sounds, it needs to be a bigger number, and it'd be really nice if in a future update Novation could sort of like add that extra bit of capability to it. 20 to 22 for me, with my ears, with my synth, with my Model D, sounds about right for the sort of like middle register. But as I said, it would be really nice if you could just fine tune it and have it sort of track the keyboard. What I found with the square wave is, and I will put the peak so that all oscillators on the square wave. Now the oscillators on the peak are digital oscillators, and the waveform is pure. And a square wave has got a really kind of hollow sound to it. Funnily enough, with my Model D, it doesn't have a very hollow sound to it. It's got this kind of fuzziness to it, which is absolutely lovely. But it's not true square wave. It'd be nice to have a scope on it and see what it actually really looks like. But this is the square wave, all three oscillators on the Model D. It's got some intricacies in that sound which really are not square. Now if I play the peak, so I've got the divergence and the fine tune, and I'm trying to sort of like simulate that sort of like imperfection of the analog oscillators with the peak. It really doesn't sound anything like the Model D at all. Model D's louder, or just the volume. But you can hear there's that hollowness to the peak sound, to the square wave, and what I found was the easiest way for me to replicate the sound of the Model D is to actually choose one of the oscillators to have a different waveform. If I actually choose the sawtooth on the peak, I get that sound, and this is the Model D. A bit loud. Turn it down a bit. And then the peak. Model D. Peak. Model D. So let's play that sequence. Model D first. And then the peak. Model D. Peak. So yeah, so with a little bit of fiddling around and tweaking about, you can come up with something similar. So the next thing I'll do is I'll just apply a filter, and with a little bit of an envelope modulation on the filter, and let's see how those two compare. This is the Model D. And the peak. I think close enough, certainly warm enough, and that's the thing that I'm really looking for, is that sort of warmth and the buzziness and the little bit of imperfections, and I think it's perfectly possible to use the Peak in that way if that's what you want. Obviously, you can use it any way you like. It's got the the exactness and purity of a digital oscillator if you really want that kind of sound. So this was just a little experiment to see what I could do, see if I could sort of like match that warmth that I like from the Model D, and I think it's really doable.